Okay, guys, we're live again on Syriana analysis, and today I would like to address Ilhan Omar. When she was first elected in 2017, I was quite sure that she's a controlled opposition, and I have spoken about that in 2017. And some of my friends, Syrians, Arabs, Africans, those who live in the United States, they say, no, Kevok, you're wrong on Ilhan Omar, and she has made true she succeeded to make true the Democratic Party and become a congresswoman. And after how many years now? 5, 6 years for her first election. I think it's quite clear nowadays that Ilhan Omar, the AOC, or the so-called squad, are controlled opposition, and they have become in this position partly or mostly because of the identity politics and the gender ideology that is occupying the minds and the hearts of the Democratic Party, and therefore they wanted refugees, women, people of color in positions of power there. But just before I start this, I will just have to share this video on my social media accounts, because recently Ilhan Omar was called out on Twitter, and I followed this carnage or the drama on Twitter with Ilhan Omar. And she was compared to ISIS, and she was compared to radical jihadists by some American activists. And I personally, I don't endorse these campaigns, and I don't endorse the way she's treated. As if she is some sort of a terrorist, but she is not. And I know from what position this criticism is coming and who is criticizing her from the perspective that she is a terrorist. And now I will show you this. I posted them already on social media accounts, so I think you guys can now join this live with bigger numbers. I will just keep playing the live stream here on my mobile so that I can also check your comments, guys, because sometimes you're asking me questions so that I have to reply. Okay, skip. I myself also am seeing the advertisements of YouTube when I watch my own video. So this is the tweet that I'm speaking about. Which is published, it seems, by an American account. Okay, so this is an account on Twitter, the social space, and he or she posted something breaking. Representative Ilhan Omar has confirmed she is still considering how to respond to Kevin McCarthy removing her from her House committee position. And he or she posted this photo and the ISIS flag behind her. And I might do some things, it says. And in my it comes from a position of someone who hates Islam and the Muslims, and this is just my intuition, and I think the angle that he's treating her just because she is a Muslim, but there is a bigger background, and I think this account is completely ignoring, and I don't think he knows. So Ilhan Omar she is bashing this Twitter, and she says their opposition to me has always been about Islamophobia, and in this video I will show you and prove to you that she is one of the reasons why there is a spread of Islamophobia, or she's one of the reasons why Islamophobia is spreading in the United States. So Jackson Hinkle is a political commentator in the United States. He says, you support Al-Qaeda terrorists in Syria, Idlib province, against the Assad government. I don't think the meme is out of line. And she says, what the fuck are you talking about? And Jackson Hinkle, he refers to her tweet from 2019. He says, remember this? You support terrorists like Jaish al-Islam, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, al-Nusra, and Al-Qaeda in their bloody campaigns against the Syrian people and government. 88.7% of Syrians voted for Assad in 2014, 73.4% turnout with observers from over 30 countries. Assad is Syria's democratic leader. So technically speaking, Jackson Hinkle is correct here, but I will also show you why Jackson Hinkle is contradicting himself now with this tweet. There's also another tweet from Ilhan Omar that Syria's Assad has become an icon of the far right in America. So she was busy in the past years bashing, let's say, the government in Syria and also glorifying the so-called revolution in Syria, which everybody knows in 2019, and especially when the CIA ended its covert operation in Syria, Timber Sycamore, that this was a regime change project. This was a covert operation by the CIA, which costed huge amount of money for the CIA. It was one of the costliest covert operations in the history of the CIA. So a person like Ilhan Omar, who is a representative or congresswoman, she knows this information, right? She knows that this is not a revolution, but rather a regime change project. But despite that, she tweets and she says, the people of Syria revolted against Assad's repressive dictatorship 8 years ago today, demanding a more just and free government. Peace-loving people around the world stand in solidarity with them in this struggle. I mean, the terms here used: revolt, dictatorship, repressive, they want free government, and we're just peace-loving people and we want to support the Syrian people. Now, I will show you why this is not the case. First things first, we have to go back to 2012. And in 2012, Seymour Hersh, one of the renowned best journalists, in my opinion, the investigative journalist in the world, he published this article in the London Review of Books, and the title goes by Military to Military, Seymour Hersh on US intelligence sharing in the Syrian war. So in 2012, there was the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States shared a document with President Obama warning him that the driving force, or the most powerful force underground, those who are fighting against Assad, are the radical jihadists. And if Assad is gone, this radical jihadists will take over. And this was an assessment by the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States. Barack Obama's repeated insistence that Bashar al-Assad must leave office and that there are, quote, moderate rebel groups in Syria capable of defeating him has in recent years provoked quite dissent and even overt opposition among some of the most senior officers in the Pentagon's Joint Staff. Their criticism has focused on what they see as the administration's fixation on Assad's primary ally, Vladimir Putin. In their view, Obama is captive to Cold War thinking about Russia and China and hasn't adjusted his stance on Syria to the fact both countries share Washington's anxiety about the spread of terrorism in and beyond Syria, like Washington. They believe the Islamic State must be stopped. So there was an opposition in the administration or in the Pentagon to Obama's policy in Syria, warning him that they have a shared goal in Syria, which is stopping the spread of radical jihadism and terrorism beyond Syria and beyond the region in the Middle East. But Obama was stuck in a Cold War thinking about Russia and China, and he insisted to go in this project, and then he signed this secret document, the covert operations, Timber Sycamore, to continue arming and supporting and training these so-called moderate rebels in Syria, which were non-existent. Now you will see why. The military's resistance dates back to the summer of 2013, when a highly classified assessment put together by the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, then led by General Martin Dempsey, forecast that the fall of the Assad regime would lead to chaos and potentially to Syria's takeover by jihadi extremists. Much was then happening in Syria. So similar to Libya, they forecast or foresee that if Assad is gone, these radical jihadists will take over the power in the country. A former senior advisor to the Joint Chiefs told me, so told Seymour Hersh, that the document was an all-source appraisal, drawing on information from signals, satellite, and human intelligence, and took a dim view of the Obama administration's insistence on continuing to finance and arm the so-called moderate rebel groups. By then, the CIA had been conspiring for more than a year with allies in the UK, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar to ship guns and goods to be used to for the overthrow of Assad from Libya via Turkey into Syria. So the weapons were coming from Libya, being shipped to Turkey, and from Turkey to Syria, and these were provided to the so-called moderate rebels who want to overthrow the Syrian government. The new intelligence estimate signaled out Turkey as a major impediment to Obama's Syria policy. The document showed, the advisor said, that, quote, that what was started as a covert US program to arm and support the moderate rebels fighting Assad had been co-opted by Turkey and had morphed into an across-the-border technical arms and logistical program for all of the opposition, including Jabhat al-Nusra and Islamic State. So something that started with, let's say, with the intention of supporting the so-called moderate rebels has become a border crossing operation from Turkey in order to support these jihadists, including Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, and the Islamic State. The so-called moderates have evaporated, and the Free Syrian Army was a rump group stationed in Turkey. The assessment was bleak. There was no viable moderate opposition to Assad, and the US was arming extremists. So if we want to just summarize this document, it says, guys, we're sending weapons to Jabhat al-Nusra and Islamic State. We maybe aren't intending to do so, but these weapons are going there because the so-called Free Syrian Army or the moderate rebels are nothing but some fraction of groups, and they are stationed at an airbase in Turkey, and those who are fighting, doing the fighting underground are the extremists. Now, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, director of the Defense Intelligence Agency between 2012 and 2014, confirmed that his agency had sent a constant stream of classified warnings to the civilian leadership about the dire consequences of toppling Assad. So General Flynn, he was warning when he was the director of the intelligence agency of the United States between 2012 and 2014, he was warning the administration that about the dire consequences of toppling Assad. He said the jihadists were in control of the opposition. Turkey wasn't doing enough to stop the smuggling of foreign fighters and weapons across the border. The Defense Intelligence Agency reporting, he said, got enormous pushback from the Obama administration. He says, I quote, I felt that they don't want to hear the truth. So this is from 2016, but this document was from 2012, so just a few months after this start of the regime change war in Syria. And despite all these warnings from the Defense Intelligence Agency and senior officers in the Pentagon to Obama administration on the dire consequences of toppling Assad, and those who are the forces fighting against Assad, ignored all these warnings. So if we some people may say, so how do you know what is written here is true? This is the document. This is the secret document. So you can see the classification is secret, and this was in August the 12th, 2012. Okay, in August 2012, and this is the document from the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States. The Department of Defense Information Report, not finally evaluated intelligence. So here, the general situation. A, internally, events are taking a clear sectarian direction. So the first warning is, guys, this conflict in Syria is taking a clear sectarian direction, which means it could develop into a civil war between different groups in Syria, religious or sectarian groups. The Salafist, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So the Salafist, the Muslim Brotherhood, and AQI, which means Al-Qaeda in Iraq or ISIS, are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. This is, guys, it's not me who's saying this, it's not Seymour Hersh, it's the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States sending this document to Obama. C, the West, Gulf countries and Turkey support the opposition, while Russia, China, and Iran support the regime. E, the regime's priority is to concentrate its presence in areas along the coast, Tartus and Latakia. However, it has not abandoned Homs because it controls the major transportation routes in Syria. The regime decreased its concentration in areas adjacent to the Iraqi border, Al-Hasaki and Deir ez-Zor. Here, we are talking about now Al-Qaeda. A. Al-Qaeda in Iraq is familiar with Syria. Al-Qaeda trained in Syria and then infiltrated into Iraq. B. Al-Qaeda supported the Syrian opposition from the beginning, both ideologically and through the media. Al-Qaeda declared its opposition of Assad's government because it considered it a sectarian regime targeting Sunnis. C. Al-Qaeda conducted a number of operations in several Syrian cities under the name of Jaish al-Nusra, then later it became Jabhat al-Nusra, one of its affiliates. Al-Qaeda, through the spokesman of the Islamic State of Iraq, Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, declared the Syrian regime as the spearhead of what he is naming Jibhat al-Rawafid, the forefront of the Shiites, because of the Syrian regime declaration of war on the Sunnis. I mean, the Syrian regime has never declared war on the Sunnis. This is the interpretation of Al-Qaeda, by the way. Additionally, he is calling on the Sunnis in Iraq, especially the tribes in the border region between Iraq and Syria, to wage war against the Syrian regime regarding Syria. As an infidel regime, for its support to the infidel party, Hezbollah, and other regimes he considers dissenters like Iran and Iraq. Al-Qaeda considers the Sunni issue in Iraq to be faithfully connected to the Sunni Arabs and Muslims. So later, the future assumptions of the crisis, they are forecasting. The regime will survive and have control over Syrian territory. Just one sentence. B. What could happen? Development of the current events into proxy war. With support from Russia, China, and Iran, the regime is controlling the areas of influence along coastal territories, Tartus and Latakia, and is defending Homs, which is considered the primary transportation route in Syria. On the other hand, opposition forces, so maybe this is a little bit better for you guys. On the other hand, opposition forces are trying to control the eastern areas, Hasaki and Deir ez-Zor, adjacent to the western Iraqi provinces, Mosul and Anbar, in addition to neighboring Turkish borders, to the Turkish borders. Western countries, the Gulf states, and Turkey are supporting these efforts. So they are supporting the efforts of the Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra and all these terrorist groups for them to gain control of the borders with Iraq and the borders with Turkey. This hypothesis is most likely in accordance with the data from recent events, which will help prepare safe havens under international sheltering, similar to what transpired in Libya when Benghazi was chosen as the command center of the temporary government. So this is the document coming just directly from the mouth of the horse, and they say what will happen if Assad loses this war. It will become like another Benghazi, which was occupied by these radical jihadists for a long time. And if you want to follow up a little bit more on this document, so about this, the classified document. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit here again. See if you can guys see like this better. Yes. So the document obtained by Judicial Watch said Salafi jihadists, fundamentalists who believe in the return to traditional Islam practices, the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda in Iraq were the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. Quote, if the situation unravels, there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, reads the document. So the document of the Defense Intelligence Agency says, if these people take control of the region in the east, there is a possibility of establishing, whether declared or undeclared, Salafist principality in eastern Syria. And this, I quote, is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want in order to isolate the Syrian regime, which is considered the strategic depth of the Shia expansion. This is just the Defense Intelligence Agency. And later, we know, and this is an article published by Aaron Mate, Al-Qaeda is on our side. How Obama-Biden team empowered terrorist networks in Syria. I'm not going through all the article, but only this paragraph. In waging a multi-billion-dollar covert war in support of the insurgency against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, top Obama officials who now serve under Biden made it American policy to enable and arm terrorist groups that attracted jihadi fighters from across the globe. This regime change campaign, undertaken 1 decade after Al-Qaeda attacked the US on 9/11, helped a sworn US enemy establish the Idlib safe haven that is still controls today. A concise articulation came from Jake Sullivan. Jake Sullivan was an advisor to Hillary Clinton, so Hillary Clinton was her boss. And he wrote in February 2012, so the same year of this document that was sent by the Defense Intelligence Agency to the Obama administration. Jack Sullivan, who was the advisor for the former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, he wrote her an email that says, Al-Qaeda is on our side. Now, some of you may ask me again, this is Jack Sullivan, by the way, this imperialist. I don't want to use other words now. Let's not be banned from YouTube. So, some of you may ask, how do you know that he sent this to Hillary Clinton? Well, thank you, WikiLeaks. Thank you, WikiLeaks, for publishing the emails of Hillary Clinton. And this is from 12th of February 2012 at 4 p.m. Washington time. This is unclassified US Department of State case number blah blah blah. This is from Jack Sullivan to Hillary Clinton. And this is the quote. See last item, he says. Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Otherwise, things have basically turned out as expected. I really don't know what he means by that, to be honest, because he says Al-Qaeda is on our side, but don't worry, otherwise, other issues are turned out as expected. I mean, in my opinion, maybe, just maybe, they wanted this outcome for Al-Qaeda to be on their side in Syria. This is what I also can interpret. Let's go to an article that says, for once, Trump isn't wrong, and is written by James Carden in December 2018. He says, in July 2017, a mere 6 months into this seemingly endless presidency, Trump drew fire from both neoconservative and liberal critics alike for ending the CIA's disastrous train and equip program in Syria, which, far from helping to end the Syrian conflict, simply prolonged it. Weapons meant for those elusive moderates among the anti-government rebels ended up in the hands of Sunni Islamist extremists, and thereby strengthened those who sought to violently overthrow the secular Ba'athist government in Damascus and supplant it with a hardline sectarian state, a kind of Saudi Arabia on the Mediterranean. That the United States has been the de facto working to advance such an outcome has been clear for years. As I noticed in a report for The Nation at the time, this had been acknowledged as early as February 2012, so he's referring to the Defense Intelligence Agency document, when Secretary of State, he was referring to, when the Secretary of State of Clinton's top policy, and Jack Sullivan, noted in an email to her that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. In the end, the years-long US intervention in Syria was illegal under international law, unconstitutional, counterproductive, expensive, and damaging to US national security interests in the region. It failed on moral, realist, and consequentialist grounds. On this, Trump is right, his critics are wrong. Well, Trump wanted to withdraw from Syria, and this was his genuine wish. And I know this for sure from my sources in Syria, when also he sent the former congresswoman from Hawaii to Syria, and she met with Syrian President Bashar Assad, and she delivered a message from Trump, and he was genuine in restoring peace and stability in Syria. But the deep state in the United States, the CIA, Congresswoman Hawaii, what was her name? The Congresswoman of Hawaii, Tulsi Gabbard. Man, sometimes I forget names, not sometimes, always. So Tulsi Gabbard, when she came to Syria in 2017, I believe, and she met with President Assad, and she came with a message from Trump, and she delivered the message to Syria, to the Syrian president, and they wanted to withdraw from Syria and finish this issue. Israel didn't want it, the CIA didn't want it, Saudi Arabia didn't want it, Turkey didn't want it, and a lot of countries pressured. The deep state, the military-industrial complex, and all these lobbyists didn't want it. And Trump isn't someone who can take decisions. The president of the United States cannot take a decision like that. There's so many considerations he has to make, and he bowed, unfortunately, for these maniacs who wanted to prolong the war in Syria. Now, if you want to go back, so this is the context I wanted to give you, so that Ilhan Omar knows, and she knew, that this is a CIA regime change project in Syria, and she knows that the fighting groups underground are Salafi jihadists. She knows those want to create Islamic State in Syria, quote unquote. If I know it, she knows it. She's a congresswoman. She has her sources. She can ask. And so pretending that she's supporting the Syrian people is completely absurd. She's not. She's supporting these radical jihadists in Syria. So if I want to give Ilhan Omar a title, I would say you're a supporter of the terrorists in Syria. You're a supporter of Al-Qaeda in Syria. From this angle and from this lens, I can accuse her of supporting terrorists in Syria. But not only because she's a Muslim, like these right-wing activists in the United States try to do with her. Now, in another issue which is unrelated to Syria, but it shows you the mentality of Ilhan Omar, she, in 2019, I think, or 2020, she, when in the United States they voted for the recognition of the Armenian genocide, she didn't. She didn't. And I will show you a reportage now by an Indian TV. They're ranting against Ilhan Omar for not recognizing the Armenian genocide. Let's take a look together. I think this is a really good one.
The US president is often called a Russian agent by his critics. Now, a congresswoman is being called a Turkish agent, and with good reason. The woman in question is Democratic Representative Ilhan Omar. The Ilhan Omar, who waxed eloquent about human rights in Kashmir, the same Ilhan Omar has now refused to recognize a genocide, a mass murder of Christians in Armenia, exposing her hypocrisy and double standards. Let's start from the beginning. Yesterday, the US House of Representatives passed a resolution. They recognized the Armenian genocide, a move to annoy Turkey, which has been accused of this genocide. Whatever America's motives, this killing did happen, and it must be condemned. Guess who refused to recognize the genocide? The so-called progressive congresswoman of color and member of the progressive squad, Ilhan Omar. She opposed the resolution. It passed with a majority of 405 to 11. She was among those 11 who did not support it. Why did she do this? I must read out her statement. Ilhan Omar says, and I'm quoting, "I believe accountability for human rights violations, especially ethnic cleansing and genocide, is paramount. But accountability and recognition of genocide should not be used as a cudgel in a political fight." Cudgel meaning the stick used as a weapon. So according to Ilhan Omar, recognition of genocide should not be used to settle political scores. What does that even mean? don't pass the resolution, don't call it a genocide because it shows Turkey in poor light. What kind of crooked justification is this? And a remarkable statement, by the way, does not end with that. The recognition, she says, should be done based on academic consensus outside the push and pull of geopolitics. A true acknowledgement of historical crimes against humanity must include both the heinous genocides of the 20th century, along with earlier manslaughters like the transatlantic slave trade and Native American genocide, which took the lives of hundreds of millions of indigenous people in the country. So genocide should only be decided after academic consensus. And then the classic whataboutery. What about other genocides? Right, what about them? No wonder she's being slammed for her selective campaign on human rights. A few days ago, Ilhan Omar wrote in the Washington Post, the same Washington Post that called al-Baghdadi an austere religious scholar. Anyway, in her column, Ilhan Omar said that American sanctions against Turkey will be ineffective. And now she's defending Turkey by refusing to recognize Turkey's mass murder. Do you see a pattern here? Americans are asking if Ilhan Omar is on Turkish President Erdogan's payroll. Or is she partial because Turkey is a Muslim country? It's a crass but relevant question, I have to say. 2 years ago, Ilhan Omar held a closed-door meeting with President Erdogan in New York. The meeting went entirely unreported, perhaps because Omar was not in the limelight then. And then she thanked Erdogan for Turkey's support for the Rohingya people in Myanmar. Now, Erdogan has trashed the American resolution on the genocide.
Buradan Amerikan
In a
kamuoyuna
way, they were opportunistic.
tüm dünyaya
I'm
sesleniyorum.
calling on the American public and the world from here. This step has no value. We do not recognize
Bunu
it.
tanımıyoruz da.
He doesn't recognize it. Also not recognizing it is Ilhan Omar, the same Ilhan Omar who described 9/11 attacks as an incident when some people did something. The same Ilhan Omar who compared India's NRC with Rohingyas. The same representative who keeps slamming India's position on Kashmir but doesn't utter a word about Pakistani terrorism, not once.
Partnership with India is strategic, but it's also based on our shared values of democracy, religious pluralism, and the respect of human rights. Under Modi and the BJP government, all of these mutual values have been threatened.
Big words about India and its judicial system. Sometimes she gets carried away, we know. Do you know that she had to apologize for making comments that were anti-Semitic against Jews? Here's suggested reading then for Miss Ilhan Omar. She likes Turkey. She may want to read Turkish author and Nobel laureate Orhan Pamuk. He famously said, 1 million Armenians and 30,000 Kurds were killed in this country, and I'm the only one who dares to talk about it. The Turkish press, by the way, called him a traitor. Now, the Americans have recognized the genocide, with the notable exception of this congresswoman. Remember, Germany took full responsibility for the Holocaust, Turkey not yet for the Armenian genocide. Denial and hypocrisy can be as damaging as the very acts of violence they shield.
Do you guys see the pattern here? Her, even if she's not, let's say, politically embedded or paid, but there is a pattern. Her heart is somewhere else. And her heart is definitely, in my opinion, in the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. And here is an article, especially that she denies the recognition of the Armenian genocide, making sense of Ilhan Omar's connection to Recep Tayyip Erdogan. This is a good article. On October 2019, the House of Representatives passed the Protect Against Turkey Act, which holds the government of Turkey responsible for the invasion of northern Syria and imposes targeted sanctions against the country's government and Turkish banks. While the bill was passed with a strong bipartisan vote, one Democrat refused to back the pact and joined 15 Republicans who voted against it. Since then, Ilhan Omar has been accused of an affinity for Turkish tyrant Recep Tayyip Erdogan and criticized for her refusal to support the House vote on recognizing the Armenian genocide. Omar argues that her refusal to support both seemingly critical moves against Turkey results from her personal belief in the fundamental flaws of the way in which US foreign policy is currently executed. I don't know what has the American policy has anything to do with this. Anyways, matters become even more problematic as the leader of the group that has waged the PR campaign against the resolution, the Turkish-American steering company, Halil Mutlu, has been identified as one of the donors to Omar's campaign. So one of the head of the PR campaigns in the United States, who waged a campaign against this pact in the United States, he is one of the donors to Omar's campaign. So we can draw connections here between them. All of those actions could be merely seen as a simple matter of difference in opinions. Nonetheless, the case of Omar is more complicated given her unusually close ties to Erdogan himself. As reports slowly emerge about alleged donations by an Erdogan ally to Omar's campaign, it is important to remind ourselves of the general context and the 2017 controversial closed-door meeting between Omar and Erdogan that sparked the entire controversy. So Ilhan Omar traveled to Turkey and he met with Erdogan in 2017 before she became a congresswoman, and she met with Erdogan. She doesn't have any official status yet, but she met with Erdogan behind closed doors. Strange, right? The details of the meeting are still widely unknown and puzzling, considering that back then Omar had a rather low profile, yet met with the president of Turkey behind closed doors. Since then, the Turkish state-run media channel TRT World has run a suspicious number of stories in support of Omar, while also urging readers to donate to her campaign. So the TRT, which is a state-funded outlet in Turkey, they have published several reportages on Omar, glorifying Ilhan Omar and also urging the readers to donate to her campaign. Probably the Turks in the United States, right? While none of this provides solid evidence that Ilhan Omar is Erdogan's agent or anything of that nature, as some of the overtly partisan outlets often claim, it does pose a number of difficult questions for Omar to answer. This is so accurate, in my opinion. Nobody has concrete evidence that Ilhan Omar is getting direct cash or she's working with Erdogan or an agent, but it raises lots of question marks, especially her controversial meeting with Erdogan in 2017 when she had she didn't have this status. She's not important, but she meets with him behind closed doors. She refuses to recognize to vote in favor of recognition of the Armenian genocide. She votes against the resolution to sanction Turkey. So there is a pattern here. She supports the Muslim Brotherhood and radical jihadist so-called quote-unquote revolution in Syria. There is a pattern here that we cannot deny anymore. And I went to TRT World just to be sure that is it true that they published lots of videos about her, and just see. So there's so many reportages just on Ilhan Omar on the TRT World. It's like they made lots of efforts to polish the Ilhan Omar's profile in the Turkish state-run TV. Now, the final segment of this show today. This is Jackson Hinkle, and I don't like to engage in personal campaigns or attacks or slanders. That is not my style. But I told you Jackson Hinkle at the beginning of the video, he posted statistics from the elections in 2014. How the majority of the Syrians voted for Assad, and they chose him, and he calls him a democratic leader. However, in 2021, in the elections that happened in 2021, Jackson Hinkle himself, again, he called Assad, I quote, this is from Vanessa Billy's profile, and he said it during a debate. You can see the video if you want. Assad is without a doubt a brutal dictator who has committed war crimes. He has done disgusting things as leader of the country, Syria. This is Jackson Hinkle. This is the same person who is posting statistics on Syria and calls Assad a democratic leader and the leader of Syrians. But he's the same guy in 2021. He engaged in a propaganda campaign against Syria, and he called the elections, called out the elections, and he said Assad was a brutal dictator. So those are the same CIA talking points, in my opinion. And I was following Jackson Hinkle. He never followed me. I really wanted to engage in talks with him, and probably him posting me on his channel. Of course, who am I, you know? a Syrian journalist. What I could possibly know about Syria? Vanessa says, after 10 years of war, terrorism, economic savagery, apparently the Syrian people voted in their millions in 2014 and 2021 for a, quote, brutal dictator who has done disgusting things to them. These arguments lack any integrity, evidence, or context. They sustain the war against Syria. And there were lots of discussions. I don't want to show them all because it's not the purpose of this. I don't want this to be about him, but he's the same guy who is now contradicting himself in terms of the elections in Syria, the status of the leadership in Syria, or the government in Syria, etc., etc. And this is not only about Jackson Hinkle, by the way, so I will just finish this video. I don't want to speak more about Jackson Hinkle, but in general, on YouTube nowadays, there are a few political commentators that sometimes it pops out some of the segments on Twitter, so I watch them, and I see genuinely that they don't present any solid content. They don't present solid analysis. They don't present anything that you guys can understand the situation. It's just a commentary. It's something that you can speak with anyone in the street, anyone that you meet in a bar, anyone that in a taxi with a driver, etc., etc. There is nothing, intellectually speaking, that can add to the literature of the Syrian war or the geopolitical conflicts in different parts of the world, such as in Ukraine, such as in Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, in Syria, and elsewhere. So, but these people, and I'm not, this is not only about one person or persons, there are many of them. They have a big following because also some people prefer nowadays populistic approach, simplistic arguments, trolling attitudes on social media, and it's sad, to be honest, to see this. That lots of people follow so-called political analysts that cannot analyze political situation, geopolitical conflicts. They cannot present solid analysis in this regard. This is just my opinion. I'm not attacking anyone. I'm just trying to make a point. And I hope you guys will like this video. If you did, please hit the like before you leave this video. Subscribe to my channel. It's really big help if you do these things. And if you want to support my independent work, there are different means in the description below. You can become a patron. You can become a premium member, and also through PayPal. And also, I added today 2 books in the description below. One of them is the Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard. In my opinion, this should be a Bible that you can read and understand what's happening in Syria, in Far East Asia with China and Taiwan, in Ukraine, in the Mediterranean, in Syria, Israel conflict, and in Europe, the World Bank, the IMF, and all these complex issues. You will understand how the United States thinks. You will understand how the United States works. You will understand how the empire pursues its foreign policy goals. You can even predict what the United States may or may not do. I highly recommend you guys to read this book. If you haven't, please, if you click on the link, you will not pay anything extra. I will just get a small percentage from the shares of, or the profits of the Amazon or something. To me, I want to increase my income because I want to invest in a new microphone, a really good one, podcast, and also a better webcam. So it costs really lots of money. And yeah, that's it. I will try to make another video tomorrow, hopefully, and see you next time.